When a squirrel approached Mike with her cub, the man didn't quite know what to do. It was clear that the squirrel was asking him for help, and the cub didn't look well. But what could he do to help? Days later, the squirrel reappears, frantically trying to get Mike to follow her. When he did, he couldn't believe what he found. Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. It was a cold Tuesday morning when the little brown squirrel ran to Mike, clearly begging for help. Having worked as a veterinarian in the past, he had a good idea of what to do. He started by packing a shoebox with towels and clothes so the baby squirrel could be comfortable, and he fed it with a pipette. Day after day, the tiny squirrel seemed to improve, but one morning, Mike woke up and it was gone. He was panicking. Where had the baby squirrel gone? He set out to find it, so he searched his yard and the surrounding forest. He searched for hours, and eventually he spotted a squirrel in the distance. Without missing a beat, Mike ran toward the animal and was surprised to see that it was identical to the squirrel that had brought him the baby squirrel. When he got closer, he was sure it was the same squirrel. However, every time Mike got closer, the squirrel moved a little farther away. It seemed that the squirrel wanted him to follow her. This went on for a few minutes before the squirrel decided to stop at an open spot in the middle of the woods. The place was completely surrounded by trees, and it looked like something out of a fairy tale, but something felt off. The squirrel stood still, waiting for Mike, and then the animal approached one of the trees at the edge of the open plain. It began frantically climbing up and down the bark of the tree. Something was wrong. Mike stood there, trying to figure out what the problem was. The tree looked completely normal, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. Eventually, Mike thought the squirrel was playing with him and decided he'd better go home. That was until the squirrel disappeared into a hole in the tree and started poking its head in and out of the hole. Anxious to know what the squirrel was trying to show him, Mike approached the tree and tried to see what was inside. The hole was way up in the tree, so there was no way he could reach it. Then Mike tapped the bark and realized that it sounded hollow. But that was impossible. There was something in the tree, otherwise the squirrel wouldn't be so anxious. So he decided to run home and get some tools. Using a drill and claw hammer, Mike carefully drilled a hole in the hollow bark of the tree. It took some time, but eventually he formed a perfect circle and was able to peer inside. When he did, he couldn't believe his eyes. Who would hide such a thing in a tree? But before we learn what was in the tree, take a moment to like this video and help it reach 10K. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. Now that Mike could see inside the tree, he found a bright red cooler box and it was locked. He tried to open it with the hammer, but it didn't work. Curious to know what was inside, he decided to bring the box home. When he got home, he noticed that the box had a strange smell. It smelled like something natural that had gone bad. It wasn't necessarily a bad smell, but he couldn't compare it to anything he had smelled before. What could it be? He needed to find out, so he tried once more to open the box once again. The lock was strong though, and he couldn't manage to get it open. That's when Mike remembered he had a friend who worked in construction. Maybe he could help. So he picked up the phone and called Rick, who told him he would help. Rick lived just a few blocks away, so Mike jumped in his car. On his way to Rick, Mike noticed that there was a car driving behind him, and it almost seemed to be following him. Could it have something to do with the box? That didn't make sense. No one saw him find the box, and he hadn't talked to anyone but Rick. Still, he took a different route, just to be safe. Finally, Mike arrived at Rick's house, and the car behind him passed him and continued driving. Taking a quick glance at it, Mike noticed two men in the car, but he couldn't see their faces. Rick took Mike straight to his shed, where he had a ton of equipment. But despite Rick's attempts, the lock wouldn't budge. Disappointed, Mike took it and went home. On the way home, he had a strange feeling that maybe he shouldn't have the box and the owner could be up to no good. Perhaps there was something illegal inside. At that point, Mike didn't know what to do with the box anymore. After some thought, he decided to keep trying to open it. After all, there could be something valuable in there, and he could really use the money. You see, Mike had been struggling financially, and this could be the lucky break he needed. When Mike got home, he noticed a window had been broken and the door was wide open. He ran into the house, and when he entered his living room, he noticed that the entire house had been turned upside down. Someone was looking for something. Connecting the dots, it was clear that someone was looking for the box because nothing else had been stolen. Calling the police seemed the only logical thing to do, and they arrived very quickly. They started investigating, but they didn't find any fingerprints. The people who broke into the house knew exactly what they were doing. The police asked if Mike could think of anyone who would do this, and he said no, but he didn't tell them about the box. They suggested he spend the night elsewhere in case the burglars returned, so Mike called Rick again, and his friend agreed to let him spend the night. But in the middle of the night, Mike and Rick awakened by a loud sound. When they went downstairs to investigate, they found 4 men dressed in black standing in the living room. "We're not here to make trouble, but she has something that belongs to us," one of the men said while pointing to Mike. Rick was confused, but Mike knew full well that they wanted the cooler box, but he wouldn't give it away so easily. At this point, the situation became very tense, and it was clear that the masked men would do whatever it took to get the cooler back. Mike realized he had gotten himself into trouble and told the men he would take them to the cooler, which was in his car. Reluctantly, Mike grabbed his car keys and gave the robbers what they wanted. Without another word, they took the cooler and left. What the masked men didn't know was that Mike had taken quick pictures of their license plates as they drove away. Still in shock, Mike called the police for the second time that day. Living in a quiet country, burglaries didn't happen often, especially not twice on the same day. When the officers arrived, they decided Mike and Rick should go with them to the station so they could get their statements. At the police station, the officers were upset that Mike had kept quiet about the cooler box. It was essential information, so it was stupid of him to keep it to himself. Mike agreed and he apologized, but he told them about the license plate photos. When the police ran the license plates, it turned out they belonged to a couple of stolen cars. It was clear that they were dealing with professional criminals. A few days went by and nothing happened until a couple of leads came in. The stolen cars had been spotted, so the police started to patrol the zone. Eventually, one of the troopers spotted one of the cars and called it in. They needed to enter the house, so they called in a SWAT team. When the SWAT team went in, they found 4 men in the home. They were checking something on their computer, and the red cooler box was right next to it. The officers arrested the men, and when they examined the cooler, they couldn't believe their eyes. Inside the cooler box, there was a tracker and another small box that contained a USB flash drive. The USB stick was filled with classified information and the details of a cryptocurrency account the criminals were using to receive payment. Mike couldn't believe his ears when the police shared what they found. He realized that it had been incredibly stupid to keep the box, but he was glad that the situation had been resolved. When he got home, he sat outside, looking out into the forest and thinking about how helping a squirrel mom had led to all that. What would you have done if you had found the cooler box? Let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories.